There is a particular kind of person you've probably met. Maybe you are that person. They cry at commercials. They feel the tension in a room before a single word is spoken. They carry other people's sadness home with them, like a coat they forgot to take off. They feel joy so intensely it almost hurts. They feel everything, loudly, deeply, completely. And then one day, they don't. Not suddenly, not dramatically. There's no breakdown, no moment of collapse. Just a quiet morning where they realize the song that used to move them through their entire body now sounds correct. Just correct. Nothing more. And that realization, that small, almost invisible shift, is one of the most frightening things a deeply feeling person can experience. Because it doesn't feel like sadness. It doesn't feel like anything. That's where this story begins. Let's start with who we're actually talking about. Science has a name for this: sensory processing sensitivity. Researchers estimate it affects somewhere between 15 and 30% of the population. That's roughly 1 in 5 people, wired from birth to process the world more deeply than everyone around them. Their brains don't filter as aggressively. Most people have a built-in dimmer switch, a neurological mechanism that softens incoming information, reduces the noise, keeps the signal manageable. These people don't have that, or rather, theirs is turned all the way up. Brain imaging studies show that people with high sensitivity have significantly more activity in regions associated with awareness, empathy, and deep processing. The insula, the mirror neuron system. The parts of the brain responsible for feeling what others feel, for noticing what others miss, for processing experience at a level most people never reach. In simple terms, everything comes in at full volume. A conversation isn't just words, it's tone, subtext, what wasn't said, what was almost said, the pause before the answer, the way someone's eyes moved when they were holding something back. A room isn't just a space, it's energy, tension, history, unspoken dynamics. And this doesn't happen because they're trying to be difficult. It happens because their brain is built that way. Now, for a while, this is extraordinary. The highs are higher. Beauty lands differently. Connection feels deeper. Joy, when it arrives, doesn't just feel good. It's almost overwhelming in the best possible way. But here's what nobody tells you about living at full volume. Eventually, the system gets tired. Think about what it actually costs to live this way. Every social interaction isn't just an exchange. It's a full-body experience. You're not just listening to what someone says. You're tracking their emotional state, adjusting your own responses, absorbing the tension they brought into the room, processing the subtext beneath every sentence. You leave a party not just tired, depleted, like something was extracted from you. And it's not just people, it's everything. The news, a difficult film, a stranger crying on the subway, a harsh email from a coworker. These things don't just register and pass. They settle, they stay, they echo. Psychologists have a term for what happens when empathy goes too far. When you don't just understand someone's pain, but absorb it. They call it empathic distress. It's the moment where compassion tips into something aversive, where feeling with someone becomes feeling instead of them, where the emotional load becomes so heavy that the only instinct left is withdrawal. And here's the part that matters. This isn't weakness. This is a nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting itself from overload. But protection has a cost, because when the system starts protecting itself, it doesn't do it surgically. It doesn't carefully remove only the painful things. It turns down the volume on everything. The joy, the beauty, the connection, the meaning, all of it gets quieter. And you don't notice it happening. That's the cruelest part. You don't wake up one morning and decide to feel less. It happens the way erosion happens, slowly, invisibly, one layer at a time. Until one day you're standing in front of something that used to be a portal, and it's just a thing. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside the brain when this occurs. Under prolonged stress, and for a highly sensitive person, the ordinary demands of modern life can constitute prolonged stress. The brain shifts into conservation mode. It stops optimizing for curiosity, pleasure, and long-term meaning. It starts optimizing for survival. The reward system slows down. Dopamine responses become blunted. And dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's what makes effort feel worthwhile. It's the spark behind anticipation, behind momentum, behind the feeling that something matters. When that system dims, even things that should feel good land with a strange neutrality. Achievements feel hollow. Moments that should be joyful feel distant, like you're watching them through glass. Psychologists call this anhedonia, the reduced ability to feel pleasure. And it's not the same as sadness. Sadness still feels. Anhedonia is the absence of feeling. The lights are on, but the warmth is gone. There's also something happening at the level of the nervous system itself. When a person has spent years in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning, constantly processing, constantly bracing, the system eventually learns a different strategy. Instead of staying alert, it shuts down, not as failure, as efficiency. The brain, in its extraordinary wisdom, decides, if I can't reduce the input, I'll reduce the response. And so the person who once felt everything begins to feel managed, contained, functional. They show up, they respond, they smile when expected. But inside, something essential has gone quiet. This is not a character flaw. This is not depression, though it can look similar from the outside. This is a system that has been running at full capacity for too long, without enough rest, without enough safety, without enough space to simply be, and has finally, quietly, gone into low-power mode. But here's where it gets more complicated. Because when a deeply feeling person starts to feel less, they don't just experience the numbness, they experience the shame of the numbness. They think, something is wrong with me. They remember who they used to be, the person who cried at sunsets, who felt music in their chest, who could sit with a friend's pain and genuinely hold it. And they compare that person to who they are now, someone who goes through the motions, someone who performs presence without feeling it. And that comparison is devastating, because their sensitivity wasn't just something they experienced, it was something they were. It was their identity, their depth, the thing that made them feel, in some quiet way, that they were more alive than most people. When that goes quiet, it doesn't just feel like losing a feeling, it feels like losing yourself. And so they push. They try to force the feeling back. They seek out more intense experiences, more stimulating environments, more emotional input, trying to break through the numbness the way you'd shake a sleeping person awake. But here's what the research tells us about emotional suppression. Forcing it makes it worse. When people actively try to suppress or override their emotional state, the body stays physiologically activated. Stress hormones remain elevated. The nervous system stays tense, while the subjective experience of emotion decreases. You feel less, but your body is working harder than ever. The attempt to feel more through force deepens the very numbness you're trying to escape. And this doesn't stay internal. It moves into every relationship you have. Because the people who love you, they notice, not always consciously, but they feel it. The slight withdrawal, the responses that are technically correct but somehow hollow. The way you're present in body but absent in resonance, and they don't know what to do with it. So some of them push closer, trying to reach you, and that closeness, which should feel like love, feels like pressure, like more input, like more to process. So you pull back further, and they interpret that as rejection, as distance, as you not caring. But you do care. You care so much it broke something. There's a particular loneliness that comes with this state. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who love you and not being able to feel it land. Of watching connection happen, knowing you should feel something, and feeling only the faint echo of what used to be there. This is the hidden cost that nobody talks about, not the numbness itself, but what the numbness does to the people around you and what their confusion does to you. Because when the people you love start to feel like they're losing you and you can't explain why and you can't fix it, the shame deepens, the isolation deepens, and the system, already exhausted, has even less to work with. There's a kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't reach. You can close your eyes for 8 hours, wake up on time, move through your morning routine, and still feel heavy. Not in your muscles, not in your bones, but somewhere deeper, quieter, as if your inner world is carrying weight you can't set down. This isn't the exhaustion that comes from doing too much in a single day. It's what happens when you've been holding yourself together for too long, when your emotional output has exceeded your emotional input for months, sometimes years. You kept giving, your patience, your understanding, your presence, your empathy. You regulated yourself, you stayed composed, you adapted. And at first, that worked. But eventually, something in the mind changes. This is the moment when the system stops fighting, not as surrender, but as conservation. Instead of pushing through stress, the mind begins to slow everything down. Motivation drops, emotional responses flatten, even things that once mattered start to feel distant. And the most painful part? You often can't explain it to anyone, because from the outside, you're still functioning. You're still showing up. You're still meeting the expectations. So when you try to say, "I'm exhausted," people look at you and say, "But you seem fine." And you say, "I know," because you've gotten very good at seeming fine. You learned that skill early. You learned that being easy was safer than having needs, that staying composed was more acceptable than falling apart, that the world rewards the people who carry their weight quietly. So you carry it, and you carry it, and you carry it, until the weight becomes the only thing you can feel. There is a grief that rarely gets acknowledged. Not the grief of losing someone, not the grief of a specific event, but the grief of losing yourself, slowly, quietly, over years of surviving. People who have been through too much often carry this invisible mourning. They grieve the version of themselves who trusted easily, the version who laughed without checking the room first, the version who didn't rehearse conversations, who didn't anticipate danger, who didn't analyze every silence as a warning. They grieve the self that felt light. And yet this grief almost never gets spoken aloud. How do you explain that you miss a version of yourself you barely remember? How do you tell someone that you're homesick for a place that existed only inside your own mind? A softness you didn't get to keep, a freedom you learned about too late. This grief doesn't break you, but it shapes you. It makes you quieter, more observant, more careful. It turns you into someone who cherishes peace because you know the cost of chaos, someone who values safe people because unsafe ones taught you how much it hurts. And here is the most human truth of all. Healing isn't just about becoming someone new. It is also about grieving the selves you had to leave behind, the selves who protected you even when the world didn't. You don't just heal forward, you heal backward too. So what do you do with all of this? The answer isn't what most people expect. It isn't feel more. It isn't push through. It isn't be grateful for what you have or get out of your head. The answer is less load, more rhythm, clearer edges. Let's start with load. The nervous system of a highly sensitive person isn't broken, it's overloaded. And you cannot think your way out of overload. You can only reduce the input until the system has enough space to begin recovering. This means something that sounds simple but is genuinely difficult. You are allowed to say no without a reason. You are allowed to leave early. You are allowed to not respond immediately. You are allowed to protect your attention the way you would protect any other limited resource, because it is one. Then there's rhythm. The nervous system doesn't recover through one long rest. It recovers through consistent cycles of engagement and withdrawal. Small moments of genuine quiet, repeated regularly, do more than a single vacation ever could. 10 minutes without new input, a walk without headphones, a meal without a screen. These aren't indulgences, they're maintenance. And then there are edges, the boundaries that aren't walls, but filters. Not keeping people out, but managing how much comes in at once. Choosing depth over breadth in relationships, one honest conversation over 10 shallow ones. Environments that don't demand constant performance. None of this is about becoming less sensitive. That's not the goal. The goal is to stop asking your system to run at full capacity indefinitely, and to start building a life that actually fits the nervous system you have. Here is what I want to leave you with. The numbness isn't the end of the story. It's a signal, a message from a system that has been trying to tell you something for a very long time. I need less. I need slower. I need safer. And the fact that you can feel that signal, even through the numbness, even through the exhaustion, means the system isn't gone. It's waiting, it's conserving, it's protecting what's left until conditions are right to open again. Highly sensitive people don't lose their depth, they lose access to it. And access can be restored, not through force, not through performance, not through trying harder, but through the one thing the system has been asking for all along: safety. Safety to feel without being overwhelmed, safety to rest without guilt,